We're going on assignment with the Voice of America. On assignment coming to you now from VOA headquarters in Washington, I'm Imran Siddiqui.
And I'm Alex Villarreal. 2014 is well underway, and so now is our show. First up, preparing to destroy Syria's chemical weapons, we'll hear from our Pentagon correspondent.
The U.S. economy could see some significant improvement this year, but will everyday Americans feel the boost?
Our correspondent in West Africa looks at Nigeria's deadly threat, militant group Boko Haram.
And Bitcoin, the virtual currency, how does it work and what is it worth?
Raise those shades and unlock the door. On Assignment is open for business. The U.S. Defense Department is preparing a system for destroying Syria's chemical weapons stockpiles at sea. With the Syrian civil war still raging, destroying the weapons inside the country is just not an option.
So the job is going to the water, where a U.S. ship will use special equipment to neutralize Syria's sarin and mustard gas. VOA Pentagon correspondent Luis Ramirez went on board that ship, the Cape Ray, and talked about the plans with On Assignment's Doug Bernard.
Luis Ramirez, explain to us exactly how this is going to work.
Well, the U.S. has offered to provide a ship with 2 reactors on board. These are pieces of equipment that will essentially neutralize the Syrian chemical weapons and also the precursor chemicals.
We'll change them chemically into compounds that are no longer usable for that.
It will happen on the ship's cargo area inside this tent.
This will be the most potentially contaminated area. This is the hottest area for us.
Those who will operate the system say the process is safe, and they will see to it that no toxic waste ends up in the sea. The technology is not new. The U.S. has used it to destroy America's own chemical weapons. But this is the first time it will be done at sea.
Syria has agreed to deliver those chemical weapons to a port, one of its ports, Latakia, and then from there it'll be loaded onto some Scandinavian ships, taken to a third country where then these materials will be transferred onto the U.S. ship, which is the MV Cape Ray. The estimate is that this process should take about 45 days, although officials on board that ship last week told me that it's very likely to take longer than that.
It sounds like that there's a lot of transfer involved. It seems each one of those steps brings with it certain dangers.
The reason why it's being done this way is because it, believe it or not, is the fastest way. It avoids taking those chemicals onto any third country. All of the political and legal issues involved are avoided here. The toxic waste then delivered to a third country for disposal at a facility, much the way toxic waste is disposed of routinely.
What kind of preparations are being put into effect to make sure that nothing hazardous either goes up a smokestack or goes overboard?
Well, the U.S. has a very, very long track record of destroying chemical weapons. These are very well-trained technicians that are going on board the ship. And the process involves, say, mixing hot water with these chemicals and others to neutralize. So what's left is certainly toxic waste that is toxic, but not that cannot be used for weapons at this point. The waste is then stored on tanks, inside tanks aboard that ship. These are specially made tanks that are made to store toxic waste, and then will be delivered as other toxic waste is to processing facilities on land.
You were aboard the Cape Ray. It sounds like this is a lot of equipment. Is there enough room on board for all this?
Well, this is a pretty huge ship. It's 750 feet, normally used to transport everything from vehicles to humanitarian supplies. This ship saw duty in places like Haiti after the earthquake. So it's a very large vessel. The tent where the two hydrolysis machines, those are the pieces of equipment that will actually neutralize the chemical weapons, are about the size of a small van, I would say. I would compare them to. And then, of course, the tanks where the chemicals are stored are pretty large. They seem to not take up the entire space of the cargo ship.
Still, in the end, it seems like, you know, a large portion of this ship, at least during the process, is basically going to be a chemical hot zone.
Absolutely. The technology that is used on land at various facilities around the United States where the chemical weapons have been neutralized is simply being put on board the ship. As far as exhaust systems, they're being transferred the way you would see it on a facility on land, exactly the same setup on the ship.
All right, and again, that was Pentagon correspondent Luis Ramirez. 700 metric tons of chemical weapons and ingredients. That is the amount of toxic material that Luis says the Cape Ray will be prepared to neutralize.
We're taking a break now, but on the other side, VOA economics editor Jim Randall joins me to talk about the prospects for the U.S. economy in 2014. You're watching On Assignment. 5 years after the U.S. financial crisis, many indicators suggest a recovery is finally taking hold. U.S. gross domestic product is growing at its fastest pace in 2 years, and unemployment in the world's largest economy has fallen to the lowest level in several years. But 2014 may be another difficult year for out-of-work Americans. And to talk about that, I'm joined now by VOA economics editor Jim Randall. Thank you so much for joining me, Jim.
Delighted to be here.
Tell me something about 2014. I mean, what are the prospects? How's the economy looking?
It looks like things are getting better. Okay. The housing market is getting better. Consumer confidence is growing. Investor confidence is growing. Energy prices seem to be headed down, and that kind of boosts the economy a little bit. The only kind of thing that could slow things down is that interest rates are probably headed up, and that's going to slow things down. But on balance, we'll probably grow 2-3% rate for most of the year. At least that's what the people who figure these things out say.
Okay, so it is a rosier picture, but the fact is that millions of Americans are, of course, out of work. How does that translate into reality?
Well, the unemployment rate is dropping. It's down from more than 10% down to 7%. That's an improvement, but 7% is above historic averages. It's above what we're used to. And you're right, millions of people are out of work. The economy creates an average of something like 200,000 jobs every month, and that seems like a lot, but we've got to create 125, 150,000 just to take care of new entrants to the workforce, meaning kids who grow up, immigrants who come here. They all want to work, so we have to take care of them. And so we're not getting back the millions of jobs that we lost during the worst recession in decades.
So American economic doing good is good news for the world.
I think so, because this is a huge market, probably the biggest market on earth. And if you make things in Asia and you want to sell them somewhere, if the United States is doing well, that means it's going to be easier for you to sell your products. If you grow things in Africa, if you find oil somewhere in the Caribbean or Latin America, those goods can find their way here. Or just demand here means you may get a better price for your product no matter where you sell it.
As a layman, Jim, when I think about it, I mean, what if the Congress can plan for huge projects like building highways and fixing roads and infrastructure? Wouldn't that create jobs?
It certainly would. It would also add to the deficit. And there's a huge debate between Democrats and Republicans over the Democrats want to create more jobs and they don't mind spending the money. The Republicans are very worried about the debt and the deficit, which eventually has to get paid off. And they're saying we can't afford to do this. So there's a huge debate going on.
What do you think the outlook looks like for 2014?
The outlook is improving. It's not rosy, but it's getting better. And it looks like, well, the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Central Bank, said it about as clearly as they could, which is when they decided to cut back the amount of stimulus they were doing. That says that the economy, in their view, is doing well enough that it doesn't need so much help anymore. It's not great, but it's coming along, it's perking along, it's doing better.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me. VOA Economics Editor Jim Randall. Thank you.
Okay.
Moving on, we're taking a break now, but coming up, our West Africa correspondent covers militant violence in Nigeria and efforts to help those traumatized by it. You're watching On Assignment. In northern Nigeria, Boko Haram militants have killed thousands of people since 2009, when the group launched a campaign to install strict Islamic law in the region.
Many children have been affected by the violence, and though the government promises help, for now, the staff at one school in Maiduguri say they are doing the best they can on their own. VOA's Ann Look went to the city and we talked about what she saw. Let's roll it. So Ann, you just came back from a trip to Maiduguri, where Boko Haram originated. Tell us about what you saw there.
When I arrived in Maiduguri, the city was very calm. There hadn't been attacks since the beginning of the state of emergency, actually. The curfew had been extended to 11 p.m. People were starting to go out at night. People were reassuring me that, oh, Boko Haram militants wouldn't last a minute in this city. You know, this city is safe now. And keep in mind, Maiduguri beforehand was the site of just near daily bombings, drive-by shootings, just really violent. And so we went from that to the day I was supposed to leave. There was a massive attack on the army barracks, the police station, and the Air Force base out by the airport. And the city just transformed, like overnight. It was, 24-hour curfew, roadblocks everywhere, really tense, angry soldiers. I visited the scene of the attack and saw as much as they would let us see. And it was pretty devastating, burned out buildings, burned up airplanes, it was interesting to see that transformation of a city that was kind of reemerging.
There are few resources here for those orphaned by the insurgency. This school in Maiduguri is enrolling them for free.
Can we see if you are an orphan, please raise up your hand. All those that are orphans, raise up your hand.
Headmaster Suleiman Aliyu says they work to restore some normalcy.
We have primary science, English comprehension, we have quantitative, we have agric science, we have Arabic, we have health education, we have computer, we have handwriting and fine art. All these are subjects.
What can you tell us about what you learned?
Yeah, I mean, in my coverage, I've been really interested in kind of the what happens after. Even if we're able to get a handle on this insurgency, to stop the violence, we're talking about years of violence and instability. We're talking about, thousands killed. And so what happens now? I was speaking with, women and children and journalists and, people who've been really traumatized by what they've seen and what they've experienced. For example, children, I was speaking with a psychologist who explained to me that, for a child, that moment when you realize that your parents can't protect you anymore is really devastating, is really traumatic, and really, really terrifying. And you have to keep in mind, too, that civilians have kind of been caught in the middle of this because we've got both the Nigerian security forces and Boko Haram being accused of serious abuses.
Were you able to talk to people after the attack to determine if there had been a shift in their perceptions of Boko Haram in the area? Was there a sense of fear?
Yeah, definitely a sense of fear. And almost the shift happened more in terms of their perception of the military and their relationship with the military. Keep in mind, the relationship between civilians and soldiers in Nigeria has been pretty problematic, in particular in the north. The police have responded pretty heavy-handedly to Boko Haram and have been accused of quite a few abuses against civilians.
Now, Ann, let's go back to basics a little bit. What can you tell us about what's the motivation behind the emergence of Boko Haram and the motivation behind these attacks?
Yeah, well, Boko Haram kind of came about as an Islamic sect. And, it's called Boko Haram, means Western education is sinful or is forbidden. And it came about because the preacher who founded Boko Haram, one of his common preachings was preaching against this elite, this corrupt Western educated elite that he felt had kind of taken Nigeria hostage, that, the North was underdeveloped, that they weren't seeing the benefits of modern day statehood, of being a part of this country, and that they wanted to move towards Sharia law, towards Islamic law, and they wanted to establish an Islamic state in northern Nigeria to restore a sense of social justice to the system. And keep in mind, Sharia law, Islamic law, has a history in northern Nigeria, and there are several states that have adopted it actually as their law.
All right, our thanks to Ann Look, VOA's West Africa correspondent. Now, Nigeria declared a state of emergency in 3 northeastern states in 2013. Human rights groups have accused the military of using heavy-handed force in its crackdown against Boko Haram.
Moving on, let's suppose for a moment that you want to buy something anywhere in the world, but you don't want to use your credit card, your bank account, or any other common financial service. It is possible, though, if you're using the virtual money called Bitcoin.
Devised in 2009 by a secretive software developer, the digital currency is creating a lot of interest and some controversy. VOA's George Putich has reported on Bitcoin, and when I talked to them about it, I learned quite a lot. See for yourselves.
Bitcoin is the first totally decentralized digital currency. It's actually digital file, but it's heavily regulated, and the total number of Bitcoins in the world has to always be accounted for. So there's no way you can counterfeit a Bitcoin.
Now, it's interesting that you describe Bitcoin as being heavily regulated, because I think the perception that a lot of people have gotten is that it's not regulated. So how secure is this?
It's actually very secure. And what's more interesting, the more people join the system, the more secure it is. You have to download a piece of software into your computer. And you entered a system in which every single computer in the system knows where every single Bitcoin is.
Bitcoin is basically solved a computer science problem that for the first time allows just 2 people to transact online. So it's decentralized. There is no Bitcoin company, there is no government. It's kind of like email.
This also makes it attractive to criminals who want to transfer money secretly, but U.S. law enforcement agencies recently shut down an online black market based on the system. As the chairman of Bitcoin Foundation's Regulatory Affairs Committee, Marco Santori, points out, all Bitcoin transactions can be seen by all other computers.
Those who exchange Bitcoins for other digital currencies or who exchange Bitcoins for dollars are money transmitters under the Bank Secrecy Act.
There are some issues, though, with government approval, correct? There were, in the case of China.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
The Chinese government recently banned Chinese banks, and then they also banned transaction more recently they banned transaction in Bitcoins.
So what happens then to those people in China, to their Bitcoins that they've accumulated? Do we know?
They still have their Bitcoins. Chinese government, even if it wanted to, could not take away those Bitcoins. The only thing is that what a government could do is to punish those businesses that accept the Bitcoins.
Now, what is a Bitcoin in terms of worth? How much is one Bitcoin worth in US dollars?
Right. In the beginning, Bitcoin was worth a fraction of a dollar, a few pennies, actually. But as more and more people started joining the system, the value of the Bitcoin started to rise. Beginning of December, one Bitcoin was worth over $1,000. It fluctuates like any other currency, so it's just a market, money market.
So now if I'm just a regular person in my home, what's the incentive for me to join into this system and start using Bitcoin?
Right. Let's say you are in France and I'm here and I want to send $1,000 to you. So I send you my Bitcoins, and then you contact a local business that trades in Bitcoins and convert it into euros. And you have your euros, and the fee for the transaction is a small fraction of the fee that banks or other financial institutions charge.
Now, finally, let's talk a little bit about the timeline of the Bitcoin, how it came about. Really, I feel like I've just been hearing about it a lot more lately.
Right. In 2009, someone named Satoshi Nakamoto published a scientific paper about Bitcoin and devised the software for Bitcoin in open source. In the beginning, it was only for computer enthusiasts and geeks, but other people started joining the system. Still, we do not know who the inventor of Bitcoin is, but Bitcoin system obviously works.
And again, that was VOA's George Putich. Now, as George mentioned in December, China banned its financial institutions from handling Bitcoin, saying the currency has no real meaning. But here in the U.S., Central Bank Chairman Ben Bernanke says the digital currency may have long-term promise. As is often said, only time will tell.
Well, we go now next to Egypt, where by law, groups of more than 10 people are not allowed to congregate. However, every week, young men meet on the outskirts of Cairo, not to protest, but to practice an acrobatic sport called parkour.
And as the men tell VOA reporter Sebastian Meyer, for them, parkour is much more than just an urban pastime.
Friday morning in the suburbs of Cairo, a dozen young men meet to practice parkour, the urban gymnastics craze that swept the world. Come rain or shine, the group called PKE, or Parkour Egypt, meets every week to work on moves. The few onlookers seem impressed, although Ahmed Nasser Saif says they're not always appreciated.
They call me a crazy man, or they don't know what I do, so I'm a stranger for that life. Why I run, why I climb some buildings.
But the sport may have advantages in today's Egypt, where crime is on the rise. Some of these men say they've used parkour to chase down criminals. Mustafa Kosha, one of the coaches, says he nabbed a pickpocket a few months ago.
That guy stole something from a girl on Tehran. We ran after him. Because of the parkour, we couldn't choose the shortest way to run. He was moving behind the cars and we jump over the car. We can't do anything like that. So we caught him and he's in a police station right now.
Parkour has also been useful for Egypt's film and TV industry. Companies like Moby Neal and Jeep use it for stunts in their commercials. As with all sports, parkour builds self-confidence, says Ahmed Mohamed Munir.
Parkour gives me a very big self-confidence. I can jump, I can go, I can run. So this gives me very high self-confidence.
But in a country where the streets are better known for tear gas and street battles than gymnastics, parkour is said to encourage camaraderie.
Parkour brings people together, I saw people, they are now my best friends. We are out together, we train together. It's a different lifestyle. And I love parkour because of that.
As Egypt continues to fracture, nothing stops these young men from training. Not divisive politics, nor bad weather. For VOA News, Sebastian Meyer, Cairo, Egypt.
Wow, man. Those guys are doing some pretty brave stunts, but believe it or not, I can do this, and I used to do it.
You know, I think if that's true, in fact, that we should have you demonstrate by doing a little parkour off of our TVs here.
I could, but if you notice in the story, the space where they were doing these stunts or parkour, it was pretty big.
Oh, so you just need more space.
I just need more space.
That's why you're not going to do it right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of other members of On Assignment can also do it.
All right, we'll see. Maybe one day. Maybe one day.
All right, we'll do that.
All right, well, that is our show for this week. But in our next episode, you will hear from our reporter covering Mideast peace talks.
We'll also take a look at people becoming farmers for the first time.
In the meantime, you can watch all of our episodes on voanews.com, Facebook, and of course, YouTube.
Thank you so much for watching. On behalf of everyone at On Assignment, see you next time.